New York, new you. A week after giving Christian 1/5 of the rent he was asking for, Devon began moving in. Began was a loose term. She couldn't afford movers and she didn't want to ask her parents, so she'd carry a box to work and then schlep it on the train from 42nd Street to Brooklyn. From there, she'd be sweaty and practically panting as she carried her belongings into the apartment, dropping them onto the ground in an unceremonious dump. More often than not, Christian wouldn't be home. He'd recently completed his MBA and was vying for the promotion at his new job already. He was driven. She hadn't remembered him being like that, but it didn't bother her. She could use some alone time. Dropping the last of her boxes off, she looked around. Her room was now full, almost to the ceiling, of boxes and bins, some with clothes already falling out of them, others more safely duct taped shut. She had inherited the bed the old roommate had left. It was nothing special, and it certainly the mattress couldn't have been tossed a good 5 years ago, but it saved her money. It also meant she could technically sleep here tonight if she wanted to. The thought of sleeping in the same apartment as Christian had crossed her mind. Of course it had. She would be lying if she hadn't been thinking about it, what it would be like to wake up in her pajamas and pad into the kitchen to find him in his boxers. She quickly shook the thought out of her head. That had been years ago. She imagined he was still fit underneath his t-shirt, perhaps not as ripped as before, but certainly still taking care of himself. She couldn't think about this. She didn't have the time or the energy to think about this. For the last week, she'd been showing up to the theater and still had yet to meet her boss. She'd been put to work by a stagehand who simply assumed she belonged. No one had really stopped to ask her who she was or what she was doing there. It was to her benefit. She gave her first name only and prayed no one remembered the fire incident. She kept her head down and did whatever was asked of her. She had gotten into a good rhythm of bouncing between the multiple theaters, essentially doing whatever was asked at the time. It wasn't uncommon for passerbys to see her sprinting down the street or hustling across the avenue to get to her next destination. She found the work thrilling. She hadn't expected it to be this enjoyable. She was constantly being tested in a good way. One night, she could be in the wings. The next, she could be an usher. Sometimes she helped paint sets, and other times she was running as if her life depended on it to replace the mic battery before the next scene change. To Devon, the rhythm of the theater worked in her favor. It kept her from processing. It kept her from thinking about the past. She had fucked up too much in her life to harp on it. Besides, after the fire incident, she had countless months of rehashing the story. It was not only all over the news, but Rosie had made sure she never forgot it. Devon shuddered at the thought of running into Rosie on the street. It was bound to happen sometime. She would eventually have to get over it. For now, she would hide in her Brooklyn bubble. She heard the keys jingling on the door and popped her head out of her bedroom. She and Christian hadn't seen each other since they agreed to be roommates. She panicked. Should she say hi? What if she had the headphones in? What if he had headphones in? She should probably walk into the living room to let him know that someone was there, but it might scare him. She should walk out. Yes, that's what normal people did. They walked out of their bedrooms and gave a wave to their not quite ex-boyfriends, roommates, and then they went back to their business. Jesus Christ! Devon had rounded the corner after her internal hype-up about not being weird, only to, in fact, scare the absolute bejesus out of Christian. God, Devon, what the hell? She thought he was overreacting until she saw his phone, wallet, keys, and what looked like a green smoothie pooling at his feet. Oh, crap. Hold on. Devon rushed to the kitchen, grabbing as many paper towels as possible. Christian snatched some out of her hand, and they knocked heads as they both bent down to clean up the mess. Holding one hand out at a distance, Christian looked exasperated. Dev, please, back up. I've got it. Sheepishly, Devon rose from her crouching position and stepped gingerly away from the spill. I didn't see you. I'm so sorry. She locked eyes with Christian, who met her gaze with a stone-cold stare. Welcome home? She ventured again. God, this was going horribly wrong. She was supposed to have met him looking effortless. She wanted him to think that she was a woman who was perpetually put together. Right now, she was covered in a sheen of sweat and dirt. Her tank top and sports bra from 10 years ago both had stopped supporting her somewhere around year 5, but she still held on. Her hot pink gym shorts were also doing her no favors as they rode up into the crevices of her cheeks. She 100% had a wedgie. Fucking perfect. Gathering up his things, Christian dumped everything onto the kitchen counter and began rinsing them off. From this angle, she could see the flex of his biceps. One of his t-shirt sleeves had risen up, and she couldn't help but notice the toned definition of his arms. Stop staring, Dev. She shook herself out of her own lust. Of course, he could feel her eyes on him. They were less than 3 feet apart. Sorry, She looked at him for the first time and came up with a lame excuse. You just look tired. Wow, thanks. It's nice to see you too. She rolled her eyes. This was a side of Christian she absolutely hated. Granted, she hadn't meant to be mean to him, but she was trying to cover up her own angst. She had forgotten that Christian's response to basically anything about him was met with a defensiveness and a mild hostility. She wouldn't apologize. She knew how this went. She would apologize, and Christian would say it wasn't a big deal, and then she would feel more uncomfortable. She'd apologize again, and then Christian would remind her of all the times that she'd been mean to him in the past, no matter how unintentional it was. So, no, she wasn't going to apologize. Did you have a good day? She leaned against the doorframe as Christian moved around her and back into the hallway, taking off his shoes. I did. It was busy. I see you're all moved in. He peered past her and into the spare room. The boxes were abundantly clear from his line of vision. Yeah, I was starting to unpack. Cool. Have fun. Christian had effectively dismissed her. She watched as he threw his feet up on the coffee table and turned on the TV to a soccer game. She hovered in the doorway for a second longer before taking her cue to hide. 3 hours later, Devon had finally made some progress. She had kept her door shut to give Christian some space, but that had left the room sweltering hot. Add to that how much she was moving and hauling things around, and she had basically created a sauna. She unpacked and folded down the last of the boxes. Looking around her room, she had begun to take shape. She had her full-size mattress and headboard tucked against the back corner wall. She had wedged a nightstand in between the bed and what would serve as a makeshift desk. At the opposite end of the room, she had put a dresser, which left barely enough space to open her closet doors. In all, she had approximately 4 feet to move around without touching any furniture. Throwing herself down onto her bed, she felt her stomach growl, and she looked at the clock. It was almost 9 p.m. Of course she was starving. She considered ordering takeout, but the thought of spending more than $30 a day when she'd managed to spend none felt like canceling out her hard work. It was time to rifle through the kitchen. Cracking open her door, she heard the TV still on. She spotted the familiar characters of a rom-com paused on the screen, but no sight of Christian. She figured he was probably in his room and had retired for the night. Chris? She tentatively called out. She didn't want to wake him, but he had basically disappeared. Peering around the corner, she could see his door was open. Chris? She tried again and walked closer to his room. It didn't help that his bedroom was at the very entrance to the apartment, so she'd have to pass him any time she went in or out. Stepping closer to his doorway, she peeked inside. No sign of him. He probably went out to meet friends. It was a Thursday night after all. Maybe he even had a date. The thought of him going out to meet another woman made her feel queasy. She knew he could be lovely and charming, but she couldn't quite picture Christian being on the opposite side of a table from her. Of another woman, she meant. Not her. Never her. Since she was already standing in his room, she couldn't help herself. She glanced around. She wasn't going to violate his boundaries. She wouldn't go through his things. But she looked around from the doorway. From his dresser, that she could see a well-loved family photo from his childhood. He and his siblings all smushed together on a couch. Christian looked adorable with bright eyes and a bowl haircut, his hair sticking out from underneath his blonde locks. His ears sticking out from underneath his blonde locks. She loved this picture. She had seen it countless times in his dorm in London and then back on campus. It had been with him in his first apartment in New York, and now here it was again. Next to that photo was an old painting of a boat. This was less familiar to her. She had only seen it a couple of times. She was about to step in to peer at it closer when she heard the front door open. I literally leave you alone for 2 minutes and you're in my stuff? His tone was light, if slightly suspicious. She couldn't blame him. She was indeed standing in his room, inching closer to his dresser as he had walked in. I was looking for you, and then I got distracted by the painting. She clocked the takeout bags in his hands, and her stomach growled. I got us Chinese. I hope your order is still the same as always. She made a mental note to thank the gods later for his intuition. Beef and broccoli, a side of dumplings, and lo mein? She asked hopefully. Yes, and because it's your first night here and I'm feeling charitable, I even got you General Chow's chicken and fried rice, no shrimp. He had remembered her allergy? Christian was being oddly nice, but she wouldn't question it. God, I love you. She closed her mouth quickly, but not before it had popped out. He perked an eyebrow out at her. You really must be exhausted if you're telling me you love me. Come on, let's eat. She followed him into the living room with minimal effort. They gathered the necessities. She had forgotten how easy it was to fall into a rhythm with him. They had done this 100 times in college. She would grab the dishes, the forks, the napkins, and one bowl for him. He liked to eat his rice in it. He would lay the food out on the coffee table, and they'd sit on the floor with their backs against the couch, watching crappy TV together. It felt good to be settled back into familiarity. Being near Christian when he wasn't in a good mood was hard. Being near Christian when he was in a great mood was easy. They'd known each other long enough that they had adopted each other's habits. It was only a matter of reawakening them now. Once they had settled down, Christian hit resume on the TV and he caught her up to the movie. Still got a thing for Meg Ryan, I see. She playfully nudged his shoulder as When Harry Met Sally played on the TV. He had paused on the diner scene. I think she's a phenomenal actress. Plus, you used to have a thing for Billy Crystal. Hey, I've got no shame about that. He loves her so much. He also is wildly hilarious, so give me a funny man who loves me any day. That's my ideal. She didn't try to fill the awkward pause as she finished her sentence. She waited for Christian to say something, but it seemed like he was pondering. So, why were you so riveted by my room? Devin froze up. She was embarrassed. I was looking at that photo of you, Jackie, and Andrew. You know, the one where you're all wearing matching Disney t-shirts and have big smiles on your faces? He murmured as he took a bite of lo mein. I was happy to see it still on your dresser. That was all. He nodded his head in thought before responding. What'd you think of the boat picture? I sort of recognized it, but I couldn't place it. Did you have it in your dorm? He shook his head. No, it used to be hanging in my apartment on 37th Street, the one I had with Joe. Devin tried to recall. She had been in that apartment sparingly. Things had been weird with her and Christian. Things had also been weird between her and Joe. She wasn't surprised. She had basically blocked it out. Remember that day you came over and brought me a plant? Devin recalled it with zero fondness. She had the best intentions. She had brought him a plant for his new home, and then a week later found out that he had let it die. Yes, and you killed it within a matter of days, she deadpanned. Christian chuckled. Yes, but the painting was hanging across from my bed. I put your plant under it, and you asked me about the painting. My grandfather did it. It's a picture of the lake he grew up at. We used to go as kids with my dad all the time. Realization dawned on Devin. Of course it was that image. She had forgotten the story behind it. She had almost forgotten about his dad. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have remembered. You told me this, and I guess I forgot. It's a beautiful picture. She wasn't sure if she should address his dad. Christian rarely, if ever, mentioned him. She didn't know if she should even acknowledge the brief mention of him. It's all good. Figured you needed some prompting because it's been a while. Devin nodded and went back to eating. She stuffed her mouth so she couldn't respond. She didn't know what to say. It had been a while. It had been her fault as well. That apartment on 37th Street, the stuff with Joe, everything that she had made a mess of. She felt Christian's eyes on her before trailing back to the TV. They had reached the end of the movie where Billy Crystal says, I came here tonight because when you realize you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible. She couldn't help it. She held her breath. She wanted the rest of her life to start right now. She simply hadn't realized it yet.